Welcome to another episode of Two Average Joes. I'm Joseph St. John. I'm retired law enforcement. As people who have watched this know, I spent about 30 years in the profession, up to a captain in the Newport News Police Department. And for a few years, I was chief of police in Columbus, Mississippi. And my partner here, who's looking very studious.
Yeah, I was trying to move around some books so I'd be prepared, but my name is Robert Baker. I'm basically a criminal defense attorney in Michigan. I have been since 1997. Also do some other different types of law, mostly to do with trials and litigation. But we are here about the Michigan murders. We are talking about Jane Mixer. She was the third victim in the string of about 7 or 8, depending on how you count and who counts them,
Right.
that occurred in the Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area from 1967 to 1969. Ending with Karen Sue Beineman's murder in July of 69, when John Norman Collins was convicted. He got convicted a year or two later. I think it was in 70 or mid 1970 of her murder. And that murder has implications to this murder, the one that we're talking about today, which is Jane Mixer. And Jane Mixer was a first-year law student in Ann Arbor, just to rehash briefly. And she had put her name on a ride board or ride boards. A person named David Johnson was supposed to pick her up around 6:30, 7 o'clock. He did not. She ended up dead, strangled, shot twice in the head with a .22. She had a stocking around her neck, and she ended up at Denton Cemetery on to make a correction of the last episode. I had said Route 10. It's actually Route 12. It's now a 4-lane highway. It was a 2, I believe, back in the day in 1969. She was heading home pursuant to her father to spring break. Okay, so just to give you a heads up, Gary Earl Leiterman was convicted in 2005 or 6 of Miss Mixer's murder, we believe erroneously. We're not going to get to that. He'll have his own episode, but we are just basically going through. We had stopped. We're talking about the differences and the similarities in the first 3 murders, and then I was going to try to roll through the coincidences. But I started today to reread the transcripts, and down below there will be some links to where the transcripts are. This is the trial transcripts of Gary Earl Leiterman that occurred in 2005 or 6. I believe it was in Washtenaw County, even though the body was found in Wayne. I don't know why that occurred. But we have had a couple of comments from Joe. You were going to address.
I do have it. It's Empress Rex. I think I have that correctly. Let me double check. I want to give everybody credit. Yeah, Imperious Rex, I think it is. Imperious Rex. And we appreciate you commenting, Mr. Rex. We appreciate that.
We do that.
So Imperious Rex, thanks you very much. And his comments are very, very good. So if you're looking at this on YouTube, we're on several different things. But if you're looking in YouTube, please take time to look at the comments. They're great.
Right. And one of his questions were about the books. And I had kind of just breezed through it quickly, and I will again. But the first book that was written was by Edward Keyes, and he was the writer of The French Connection, if you ever saw that movie, which is a great movie, that came out in the 70s. But he wrote the Michigan murder book. I believe it came out in 76. Okay. And it's really, really well written. Okay. And it goes through all of the murders, including Jane Mixer's. And Jane Mixer's, they lump in John Norman Collins being the murderer in this book, the initial book. The second book was written by Earl James, and it's called Catching Serial Killers. He retired as a lieutenant in the Michigan State Police. He was the evidence guy of this task force that's eventually set up. It's still not set up as of the Jane Mixer murder, but it is eventually set up. And we have the press conference that I sent to Joe, which sets it up, and we'll put it in the appropriate place. But this book is full of real evidence, and it's by a person who was on the task force and who was in charge of the evidence. The problem is he did not edit it. So it is horribly written. There's many errors in it. But throughout the whole book, he goes, and half of the book is John Norman Collins or the Michigan murders. The other half is international and national murders that had occurred up to, and I believe this was published in 2002 or 3. So this is the second book that we're using in source documentation. The third book is a book written by Maggie Nelson. It's called Jane, a Murder. And this is basically a book of poetry and different writings of the victim. Okay, this is a really, really good book. There's also thoughts and memorandum and stuff like that from Maggie of things that she knows about the family, specifically one which tears my heart out as a defense attorney. It says, according to family lore, there was a great bonfire in which all of Jane's possessions perished. Her journals, her clothes, her scrapbooks, her books, her typewriter, her school papers, her love letters. Her parents supposedly set this fire a few days after she was killed when they went to Ann Arbor to clear things out. The way my mother remembers it, they set the fire outside the dorm room at her law quad. My understanding, and I can't find it, is that the police gave back. So when they found Miss Mixer at the Denton Cemetery, she had a suitcase which had been urinated in, which had her clothing in it, a bag which had a gift in it, and some paperwork from evidently her schoolwork, and some other items. That many of these items were given back to the family, which were burned.
That was not good.
Joe, tell us about what kind of errors that the police made in procedure as far as giving potential evidence back to.
I have nothing good to say about that decision. The only thing worse is when we discuss how well kept the evidence was that they kept.
Yeah, we'll get to that too. We'll get to that.
I'm going to be honest with you. It's easy to go, it's 1969. They didn't know. No, you knew that. You knew. That's just a blunder.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, this is the book, and it's a good read, but this in the sequence of, and she was writing this as Carrie Leiterman's trial went to trial, which was in 2005. All right. So then the next book she wrote was called The Red Parts. Okay. And this is her memoir about the trial and what it did to her family. And really, it's more of a memoir about her, but it's very, very good perceptive wise as far as the witnesses that take the stand and then her perception of it. And then it's really, and I don't know how to say it, but when a murder occurs, and Joe, you're well aware of this as a cop, there's a ripple effect.
Yes.
That goes well beyond the scope of just the murdered person and her family. It just like permeates out and out and out. And even it's affecting me because I'm rereading this stuff. And even as a defense attorney, it rips my heart out for several reasons.
I think that one of the it's kind of like when we first started doing this, we were going to make sure we didn't blow over the victims.
Yeah.
Which I hope we are not doing. Okay. And understanding they were people. But one of the things that happens in murders and suicides and just tragic death in particular is it's almost like, think of a bomb exploding. Okay, all of the collateral damage is so amazing, and it's so amazingly bad. Like there have been situations where, and I'm aware of these, where a young person died in a car accident, a tragedy, and in a couple that I'm thinking about, it was not their fault. They're just merely in a car, an accident occurs, it's bad, they die, and the family and you would go, wow, that's a tragedy. But even the bigger tragedy is that family is ripped apart. There'll be divorces. There'll be family members that will never talk to each other again. And that dynamic is beyond me. I'm not here to get into that because I'm not saying I understand it all. I'm just here to say it's real. So I can only imagine what they went through.
Right. And we had mentioned it in the previous episodes, but both the serial killer book by Earl James and the original Michigan murder book, they use pseudonyms or different names for the victims and most of the people in it. It makes it very confusing. As far as
I don't know why they did that. I mean, by that time, that they wrote those books. I mean, they had let out Helter Skelter and put crime scene pictures in it. So, after that, what else is left?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, we'll get on that book in another episode.
Right. And then the last book that was written which was written just a few years ago, which was written by Greg Fournier, and it's Terry and Ypsilanti, John Norman Collins Unmasked.
Mhm.
And in it, he really short shrifts Gary Leiterman's case or Jane Mixer in it, and no detriment to him. Gary was convicted of the murder, so it is what it is. But you'll find, hopefully, by the end of our analysis of it, that he was improperly convicted of it,
Right.
that it fits more in the stream of murders that were occurring.
And one thing I want to say, because I've already read other stuff, it was DNA. DNA is not in you, it's of you. Let me explain that to you. It's not in you. It's not like you got this DNA in you and it only can get out. Only can get out certain ways, right? No, actually, your DNA is of you. It's everywhere. You literally could be smoking a cigarette, drinking a tea. You could be drinking a soda pop out of a straw, throw your straw, and your DNA is there for whoever knows how.
Yeah. And one of the DNAs that they use, not to just as a precursor, because we're not going to get way deep in it, but they use skin cells. Okay. Well, I don't know if you've hit a pillow or a bed ever when the sunlight is coming through the room, but all of that is dead skin cells, and it's whoever has been in that room. So say you hit a bed that's in a motel room, it's all the DNA mixed of every person who's ever, because they don't wash the cover. Let's just don't want to let you gross y'all out. But if you ever see they use a Lumilight to see whether DNA is on something. If you ever saw Lumilight on a motel bedspread, it would scare the crap. You'd never touch another bedspread on a hotel.
Yeah. So that's the stuff that I want you to keep there, because people think it's something in you. Like you had this thing in you and it only came out like if you do a crime.
Right.
It's not the way it works. It's of you. It could be anywhere. I could take a cigarette and have your DNA. If you smoke, somebody could go get your cigarette that you took with your DNA off, and it's like happen to drop it off at a place you didn't need to be. Well, guess what? You're there now. We need back off a little bit and understand we're going to go deeper into that. And also the fact that there's cross-contamination is another story for another time.
Yeah, cross-contamination, which that's when we get to Jane Mixer's trial. Well, how are we going to do this? We're going to do John Norman Collins next?
We are going to do Gary twice.
Okay.
Just like we did here. That's coming up. Then we're going to go do the rest of the murders and give all of those victims there, because I think that people need to have an understanding of what these murders were.
Yeah.
And then we will go into Gary's trial.
Well, you had used the catchword time and place, and it's important as far as this murder goes, because there's another murder that occurs. If you say that she died at midnight on the 21st of March, there's a woman who disappears on the 22nd of March, and she is found 3 or 4 days later. Okay. And that is the next murder. And she is brutalized with a log. Her head is pounded in. Mm-hmm. And,
one of the interesting things is that people are talking about a 22 gun with him, and believe it or not, John Norman Collins actually killed somebody else with the 22 gun. But apparently this one makes it different, and I don't know where those people are going.
Right. And he also was known to have a 22 at the time. It's in this is before Gary Leiterman's trial. He had published this book, and in here it said John Norman Collins was known to have a 22. That John Norman Collins and another guy burglarized and stole a gun with the exact same marking, 6 lands and grooves. He's saying the 21st or 22nd or 23rd. In here it was March. I think it's an error. But he had another gun, the same.
Yeah.
22 that would have matched it. So what we were going to wrap up at least today was, we had talked about differences, similarities, and we really didn't get into the coincidences, but that Miss Mixer was at the law quad at University of Michigan. Kitty corner from that was this fraternity, Theta Chi. And in it was a guy named David Johnson. He was identified by the police in '69 at Gary Leiterman's trial. He actually took the stand in Gary Leiterman's trial. And he was known by and known to John Norman Collins, and they had arguments regarding something we don't know. But so is it a coincidence that John Norman Collins' frat brother is kitty corner from the law quad? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a big coincidence.
Right. And we had talked about, and we'll just talk about it briefly again, almost all of the murders relate to getting a ride. Okay. Yeah. The first one, the victim leaves her house because it's hot, or apartment because it's hot. She goes walking, some dude in a gray car, which John Norman Collins happened to have a gray car at the time, picks her up, and she's never seen again until she's dead. Okay. There's a ride involved there. Second, for sure, she was looking for a ride because she was trying to get to Ann Arbor from Ypsilanti. She gets in a car with 3 people. John Norman Collins identified in the car. John Norman Collins identified he lived across the street from her where she lived. But he was looked at, identified, and dismissed as a potential perp at the time. His uncle being a corporate at the Michigan State Police, did it have an effect, Joe?
And when we get done with this, I'll let them make up their own.
Right.
Because I think one of the things with Jane Mixer, let's not forget, she had laundry detergent on.
All right. Right. The laundry detergent was in the ligature that was around her neck. Okay. Well, it wasn't pantyhose. It was actually a stocking. Okay. And this stocking was for a woman that was approximately 6 feet tall. Well, John Norman Collins's aunt, who was Corporal Lake's wife, was approximately 6 feet tall and of an age, because this is in the 69. I believe that younger women weren't wearing stockings anymore, except for maybe for lingerie purposes. But she would have been of an age that was wearing stocking, and so there was laundry detergent in the knot.
Right.
And actually, in Earl James's book, he says, well, presumably she was held or maybe murdered in a basement laundry. Imagine that.
Imagine, I think they took somebody else there and murdered them and painted the floor, but we'll get into that on the other episode. That's why it's very important, everybody. We do Jane Mixer. We're going to come back to her. Her case is way important, and we want to respect her.
Right.
We talk about Gary Leiterman. We're coming back to Gary.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to understand these other murders where he actually is in a laundry room, okay, and he repaints it. So I'm not trying to be funny, but a laundry room with imagine there would be laundry soap.
Yep.
Not that they
and a stocking of a woman who wore
dry. I don't think we're on a wild goose chase here, people.
It doesn't seem like it.
As a matter of fact, we'll do it on another episode, but I do believe he was driving around the neighborhood with evidence that he had collected of his own evidence, sitting in a what type of box?
A laundry detergent box.
I'm just gonna.
Well, this is coincidences, man. We have just listed about 10 coincidences that would have had to have occurred for Gary Leiterman to be the perpetrator.
That's why I want everybody that's listening to this now, when you go, well, y'all should just know. If you do not understand the other cases, you will not understand why we feel about the Gary Leiterman case and Jane Mixer the way that we did.
Yeah, and the brutality of the murder that occurred within 24, 48 hours, that to me is very telling. The prosecutors were kind of leaning towards that Gary Leiterman was a copycat killer. Okay, that this was a copycat murder because they're trying to say this is so different than all the others because she wasn't brutalized. All right, and that is a non-starter in my mind because none of them are the same.
Right. None of them. Another thing for everybody, I'm going to have a link for last episode because I don't want to get lost on that and repeat myself. I have not a theory, okay, not an idea, but I have a distinct opinion based on a lot of years in police department about why things happen.
Right.
And I'm not want to repeat myself over and over, but there are interrupters, and I'm just going to go to that.
And as a precursor for the next episode, this is, we're going to put it in the link, but there's a very good movie, and it was done in 1959 that has Jimmy Stewart in it. Okay. And Jimmy Stewart plays a defense attorney that has to defend a guy who's charged with murder, and they know he murdered this person. And so he goes into the jail cell to talk to this guy, and he says, there are 4 defenses to murder. One is it wasn't murder. Okay, it was suicide or natural causes. The second one, potential defense is you didn't do it. Okay, the third offense is legally justified, which would be like self-defense. And then there's a fourth one where the killing is excusable, which would be like a heat of a passion defense or something like that. So if you go back to the didn't do it thing, I have modified, and this actual statements that he makes, I make almost to every single criminal client because I have to determine what the defense is. Okay. And in this case, in Gary Leiterman's case, it would be that he didn't do it. Okay. And it's what I call the SODI defense, SODDI. Okay. Some other dude did it. All right. And you have to prove it. All right. And in America, they say you're innocent until proven guilty. That's not true.
That is not true.
You are not going to find that. And there's even a statement that's even stronger. It's better that 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man spent 1 minute in jail. That is not true.
That is also incorrect.
Right.
If you are watching this show, I want to stop. I'm going to make a public service announcement.
Sure.
If you're watching this show, I want you to look at me. If you believe any one of those situations are true, leave me your number in the bottom. I'll call you because you need a lot of explaining to. Neither one of those are true.
Yeah.
You're remotely close.
Right. And so just to tee up Gary's case, you have his DNA on a victim that is found in 2004 or 5 of a victim from 1969. Okay. So you have to basically prove that is circumstantial evidence that you were around her when she died. Okay. They tie it up with some handwriting evidence, which we'll get into, which was total bullshit. And then he had some newspapers that were in his closet that a roommate said he had that. And then he had a 22 evidently at the time, which, all of those are, even if you take them all together, I don't think you get there to beyond all reasonable doubt. But
and let me explain something to you. I'm not going to put a link in here on this one because I think I've already put it one time. I wrote an article about why monsters matter. It's about why people like crime. If you think that Gary Leiterman was the only person in Michigan that was keeping up with this co-ed murders after they had 2, because it wasn't a serial killer, you are incorrect.
Right.
Okay? There are people that collect stuff like that. There's people that collect an incredible amount of crime stuff, and it's the article one day I might do an episode on it, but not right now. But it's why monsters matter. We are completely fascinated with stuff. That does not make you a murderer.
That, and I would even discount that. So back in the day, okay, this isn't the time of the internet or anything. The only source of news was the 3-channel TV that Joe and I talked about originally, and the newspaper. So, and my parents had stacks of newspapers, and the newspapers were big, right? They weren't small like they are now. They were huge, and we had stacks and stacks and stacks because they came every day. Actually, Joe and I were both paper boys, and we delivered them.
Yeah, and I mean that's true. People being interested in crime. I know it sounds horrible, but I bet you right now, for any of you you're younger, your grandparents kept the papers when Kennedy was killed.
Yeah, I think I may have a copy of them.
Yeah,
doesn't mean I killed him.
Yeah, papers where when Martin Luther King was killed, where Bobby Kennedy was killed. I mean, people probably saved the paper from when people went to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they went to the moon. It just meant they had papers, okay? And I don't think collecting papers, either way that we just mentioned, was unusual. I'm going to say it for the first time this episode. Time. Very, very important. Keeping papers was not some strange scenario.
Right. And if you're even if you're just stacking up normal newspapers, this was all over the news at that time. So it would be on the front page. All right. So you wouldn't be collecting them just because you keep a newspaper or a stack of newspapers for, say, 3 weeks. I mean, eventually they pile up and you'd have to burn them or throw them away or something like that.
And keep this in mind. I'm not sure by the third murder they had tied the first two murders together. And
I
I'm
don't
not sure how much would have been in there, but there was just people that kept papers. And, there's just, I'm not getting into Gary's head, but people have an absolute paper. It just doesn't mean anything. It just doesn't. I mean, there's people that they kept the crime section. I remember at one point in Newport News that the local section in our paper was predominantly crime at times. And people would tell me about it all the time. Oh, I read this, I got this, and they knew as much about stuff as I did. I mean, seriously. They
Right.
had read things. They had talked to this guy and that guy. People being interested in crime is that is not even. I don't even know how you discuss that as
Right.
being suspicious. Don't. I just don't. And that's where we go on there. But I think we should end it on this as we get ready to go to talk to Gary.
Yeah.
On a day in a lab in Michigan, there are at least three generic bits of DNA. Mixers, Gary's, and another individual who happened to be 4 years old at the time.
Right.
And somehow this 4-year-old's blood, wasn't it blood?
Yeah. A drip of blood on her, I think it was her left hand.
Her left hand.
Yeah. Unsmeared blood.
He was 4 years old when this murder happened.
And lived in Detroit.
Yeah. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that he was not there in 1969. Okay. And now Gary, generic DNA is there. They've got all this stuff spread out. And somehow we know we've got at least one contamination. That's not, and by the way, there's no debating. There's no debating. Okay. And now Gary's, who happens to just be there at the exact same time, there too. And if you're just one of those people that believe, oh, it's DNA, it has to be, there's just too much cross-contamination potential on this one. Okay. And I don't have to go any further than to go. He was 4 years old. They found a drop of blood on her. And I'm supposed to believe that evidence has not been tampered.
Yeah. And the defense unfortunately relied heavily on that was sufficient for reasonable doubt, which it was not.
Apparently not. I would have relied on it too, but common sense did not go there. Tell them before we sign off, my dear friend, tell them, our listeners, what the judge said. I think it was the judge, right? Who was it?
It was the prosecutor.
The prosecutors. My apologies, Judge.
Yeah, I'll paraphrase. He says, how that blood got on the hand is lost to history. That's what he said. And to put a finer point on what Joe said about the crime lab, this is the same crime lab. And the guy who was working there at the time, he was forced to retire because he had other people taking his qualification exam. And this is the same crime lab that was internationally made famous for the lab technician bringing in her husband's underwear to test it for DNA. And both of these people were working at the time that these three lab samples were done. And in the opening statement, the prosecution is saying how stellar this work was. There was no contamination. They said absolutely could not happen. No contamination. And
it's lost to history. And so
it is lost to history.
So if you're watching this, because Gary Leiterman died in jail.
He did, 4th of July.
So if you're listening, understand that you could be in that same situation.
Yep.
And have contaminated evidence used against you. And the best explanation, and 12 people believe this.
They do. Actually, 14 or 15 because they have alternates.
Believe this.
Yeah.
It's a loss to history. If that does not shake your confidence, I got nothing for you.
Yeah.
I got nothing for you. If that doesn't make you go, wow, I got nothing for you.
Yeah.
Okay, next week, we will hit on the Gary Leiterman situation with Gary. We are not going to go completely in his trial because we're going to wrap that up with that one. So We appreciate everybody being here. We'll be back next week. Thank y'all for coming. We hope to see you soon. Hit like, subscribe. I don't care what you're looking at. Hit like and subscribe. Make comments. We learn a lot through those.
Yeah, please do.
Make your comments. So, until next time, goodbye and
see ya.